I'd love to turn now to our panel to hear your perspectives on these governance structures, the roles and oversight related to sustainability-related risks and opportunities. So I'd like to hear from you about, what investors are expecting in disclosures about board skills and competencies in overseeing these sustainability-related risks and opportunities.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, also thank you for me for having us. And I think this, really speaks to two of the core areas of our focus, right? Which is strong and effective boards and reliable reporting. And I, actually was just sitting here nodding, Michael, at everything he said, really. This is because, in our view, governance is critically important as long-term investors for that long-term sustainable value creation in the companies that the investors own. And so this is really important as an area of disclosure. And one of the reasons that we like the framework is this, as with all things, like materiality is key, right? And so there is not one right answer to what do investors want to see for who's on the board and how do they know about sustainability. But I think what is right is to try and understand what is the right skills mix and needs for your company. So there's thousands of people watching this. There's unlikely to be one right answer to this, but what I think you start from is what do we think the material sustainability related risks and opportunities are, and therefore what skills do we need in order to think about them. So I think that really helps, and that requirement that you have in your framework that board should disclose that thinking process is really helpful to investors, because really what you're trying to do is to get a sense of the quality of the governance, right? Are the right people on the board? Are the right processes in place? And so kind of box ticky generic, just sustainability with a little tick under it probably isn't that helpful to investors. And so it's about making it bespoke and specific to your company, because as Michael rightly says, there is not one right answer. You guys aren't prescriptive, and I think that's right, but that does then put the onus on companies to make sure they're really telling that story to build that trust. And we are very supportive of the rollout of adoption of these standards, with preferably as limited as possible amendments around the world, because that consistent framework and that flexibility is also helpful. So ultimately, I think it's about sort of helping your investors understand what you think is important and therefore why you've got the people you've got. And then it's being transparent to work on that trust building.
Thank you, John. Just a follow-up question there then. Again, from an investor's perspective, in your view, how important is it that they understand and the companies disclose information on how and how often governance bodies and their members are informed about sustainability-related risks and opportunities? And what should investors or what do investors expect companies to disclose in this area?
Yeah, again, I think where we're talking about material sustainability related risks and opportunities, I don't think investors have a broadly different view than any other kind of material risk or opportunity, right? So that's why the framework is helpful. So it's good to disclose how often, it's good to disclose format, it's good to disclose, what is really going on with the process here, how is it thought about, in the same way that we would expect for any other type of governance disclosure. But I think the detail is important here, because what we don't necessarily want is just a kind of the board discussed sustainability 7 times last year, full stop. The real question is, well, then what did they do? Right? There's the kind of apologies for a bit, this is slightly informal language, but kind of like, and then what? Like the so what is important too. So while we need to know what the processes are for the fundamentals, really then how do you get to sort of what is the risk oversight? What is the impact on decision making? That's where you get the sense of the quality, I think. Because as Michael said earlier, good governance matters, bad governance matters too, right? Because one thing gives you a lot of potential value creation, the other one introduces quite a bit of risk. And so I think that's what you're trying to get to as an investor when you're looking at those disclosures around what and how. It's really the and then what.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Jen. And just sticking with you for a moment, and then I'll turn over to you, Taryn. Just my final question for now for you, Jen, is, how are boards practically taking sustainability-related risks and opportunities into account when they're overseeing corporate strategy, major transactions, risk management? How are they navigating the trade-offs that are invariably involved?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I guess I think there's probably a range of maturity and a range of how well that's being done, but certainly I think there's wider spread recognition, and we're seeing a lot more companies with more integrated strategy that does look more broadly, and that's really great to see. Because it comes from that the first job of a board, right, is to set and oversee the strategy and just make sure the business is going to exist in the long run and be a sustainable source of value creation. So I think we are seeing a broader range of factors often disclosed as being key performance indicators, as being key risk metrics. Certainly we're seeing more and more discussion of how these types of issues are considered in transactions, in capital allocation, certainly, if you think about companies looking to how they're going to make the transition, um, infrastructure, that they might need to build, how you're going to be investing appropriately in your workforce for the future shape of the company. These are all issues that we're seeing more and more. And then I think, clearly these types of issues are very at home now on a risk register. We would expect to see that in most places. Um, but often there's sort of decisions to made, right? You can't take no risk. If you took no risk, you'd have no business. And so I think what's also interesting is what's the risk appetite, and we're seeing a bit more thoughtful discussion there. I think that we say, we know what we think our risks are. We can't have none. We think this is where we're going to go. So I do think the disclosures are improving and we're seeing more, but there's clearly a lot of interest and this will evolve over time.